Hello, everybody, and welcome to this all-new episode of the Fairfax Sports Report. I'm your host, Monica Moore, and we have a great show for you tonight. Of course, high school football is underway. Week one has been completed, and we have all the news about football, cross-country, golf, volleyball, and more. I'm delighted to be joined in the studio today by some of the best sports writers from around the region. Paul from the Fairfax Times, Phil Murphy from Digital Sports, and BJ Kubarulis, a contributor to the Washington Post. But before we get to all of that, we want to thank the folks that help make this program possible. First of all, our good friends at CCI Screen Printing for all of your screen printing needs at 703-978-0257. You can buy copies of all of the photos you see on this program at www.fatboyphotos.com. You can get copies of this show as well as all of the games that we produce from throughout the region at www.pressboxvideo.com. Also, don't forget to check out our website at www.fairfaxsportsnetwork.com and our Video Vault feature where you can see highlight footage and interviews with coaches and players from around the region. You can become a fan of the Fairfax Sports Network on our Facebook page. And don't forget to send us comments, story ideas, suggestions, anything you want at news@fairfaxsportsnetwork.com. Well, as I said, we have lots of great information for you from what happened this past week. But before we get to all of that, I want to take you through a couple of news and notes from around the region. First of all, some coaching changes over at Herndon. There is a new girls lacrosse coach. Rick Casera is taking over that position, and Greg Miller is the new baseball coach, replacing Al McCulloch, who retired at the end of the 2009 baseball season. Of course, Coach Miller is a graduate of Herndon High School. He played baseball at James Madison University, where he still holds some school and conference records, and he's been an assistant coach over at Herndon since 2004. Also, congratulations to the Woodson golf team. They've gotten off to a great start so far this season. They've won 5 of their first 6 matches, including a match last night against Marshall. It was actually match play, and so they counted which team had won each hole as opposed to which team had the number of strokes. But congratulations to Woodson on a great victory. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get into football, what a lot of you have been waiting for. And so we're going to start off tonight by talking about the Patriot District. So let's show you what happened, the standings after the first week in the Patriot District. And you're going to see there that lots of success was had in the Patriot District last week. Lots of wins. T.C. Williams, the only loss, they had a hard-fought battle against Robinson, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit, but we're going to take you through what happened in each of these games. Now, of course, the Patriot District was one of the very exciting districts last year, and the first game we want to talk to you about is the Chantilly-South County game, which may very well have been the most exciting game in the region last week. Now, South County was the heart attack team last year. They always would come from behind and surprise everybody. Pete Bendorf always has something up his sleeve, and this season is starting out no different as South County comes from behind, wins with a touchdown in the last 8 seconds. And you see the statistics there. Aaron Andrews, the quarterback, now of course he's used to playing in the Pete Bendorf system, back for his senior year, and Andre Simmons. We talked about Andre last week. He's that player that has 8 college offers out there. Everyone impressed with him. No surprise that he's the player that comes up with the big touchdown. You see the stats there for Chantilly. Carson Romine replacing Roger Stripmatter from last season's Charger team. But now I'm going to turn it over to the guys. And Phil, Paul, I have 2 questions for you. First of all, what were your thoughts of South County's stunning win? And now that South County has lost Ronnie Van Dyke for the season, how is that going to impact them?
Well, hi, everybody. Paul from the Fairfax County Times alongside of Phil Murphy from Digital Sports. Phil, first question, big win for South County. As Monica said, I think it just shows how the Patriot District is getting back some of that control over the Concord District. A huge win for South County, knocking off Chantilly, a power in this region.
Yeah, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but this was an amazing game. Had it all, actually. I mean, South County, you thought the whole time they had this game in the bag, and then with 1:11 left, punt goes over the punter's head, actually through his legs, recovered by Si-Hoon Lee in the end zone, and suddenly Chantilly has the lead. South County has to drive the length of the field, 69 yards in 66 seconds. Ball's dropped at the goal line, and then 4th and 10 from the 24. As Monica mentioned, Andre Simmons coming up big. Coach Pete Bendorf running the same play twice. She touched on Aaron Andrews, his 3rd year in the system. The growth that kid's had between his sophomore year and his senior season have been utterly remarkable. This game had it all. And you said the best game of week 1. I think it's going to be the best game we see for a little while in the region. I was there, and it was just very exciting. You can't put it into words.
Well, it's just huge for South County because a lot of teams in the first week start out with kind of maybe an easier out-of-district game. South County jumps right into facing Chantilly, gets a big motivating win. It's huge for the Stallions as they move forward. But second question, Ronnie Van Dyke. Now, I know South County has plenty of talent. We just touched on Aaron Andrews. We just touched on Andre Simmons. But losing Ronnie Van Dyke, that is a hole they need to fill. How much does that hurt?
It's going to hurt him a lot. You have a kid that has 5 D1 offers on the table. You lose him for the season. Of course, he was excited at the game. Came up to me and said, "I'm coming back my senior season. Don't lose hope." I know he's going to be back his senior season, but in this district, it's just so tough. Losing a guy like that is just hard to replace. And the compliment of him with Simmons in the secondary would have been second to none in this district, if not the region. But you can't replace someone like him. I still think they'll compete. They looked great. Coach Pete Bendorf had a couple trick plays, had a little running back pass out of a wildcat formation, a little jump pass, Tim Tebow style. He went deep into his bag of tricks. Huge fake punt by Andre Simmons, ran that 64 yards down to the 4-yard line. At the time, looked like the play that would turn the game into South County's favor, and it did for a little while. Tragedy at the end with the punt going through the punter's leg, or the snap going through the punter's legs, and then the drop ball at the goal line by Ayabote, who had an incredible game aside from that. But it's just, I think this team's going to be near the top of the district. I think the loss of Van Dyke takes them, it's going to make it unable for them to win the district, to be completely honest.
Now, a good thing for head coach Pete Bendorf, he's not at a smaller school. He's one of those big Division VI schools. There are kids waiting to step in and fill that hole. Monica's going to talk to you guys about the next game on the list, West Springfield Edison.
Well, that's right. This was another one of our games of the week. And for those of you who watched the show last week, you may very well remember that we all made our picks. And actually, every single one of us picked Edison. And we were proven wrong by this West Springfield team. You see there, West Springfield winning 23-12. And you see the dual quarterbacks there for West Springfield, Schauder and Prokop. You see their numbers, both having impressive nights. Of course, one of the big questions that everyone was asking was, what is this offense going to be like with the loss of Bryn Renner, with Bill Renner no longer there? This team felt a lot of burden on their shoulders, lots of questions being asked over the summer. The offense certainly showed what they could do. And folks, they did this without Dan Collins. Of course, he is one of the players from last year's offense that is returning. He was out with an injury. He and TJ O'Connell were a couple of the players that people thought would carry the burden for this West Springfield offense. But certainly the West Springfield offense clicking, but it was the defense that everyone was talking about after the game. Now, of course, the West Springfield defense was much maligned at some points last year, but I think there can be no question about the effort that they turned in. Guys, how impressed were you with the West Springfield defense?
Well, it was just huge seeing after those 2 quick scores on home run plays that Edison is known to do, having those long touchdown runs, long touchdown passes. They shut down this extremely talented Edison group. Phil, what were some of your first impressions?
You and I were both there, Paul. When we saw the 12-0 scoreline a minute into the second quarter, what we were thinking was, here we go again. Edison returning 8 offensive starters. You just felt like Edison was going to pull away, but something just clicked. They were using a 2-quarterback system, which I know we'll touch on in a second, but that defense, Maurice McKinney, 3 sacks, Joey DeSantis, 3 sacks. Yes, this team gave up 96 points in 2 playoff games last year, but a lot of 3-year starters on the defense. It just starts with DeSantis in the middle, a great middle linebacker, Maurice McKinney on the defensive line. Very talented. They just really got after it. And actually, after those first 2 home run plays that you mentioned, Edison only had 1 sustained drive. So for West Springfield to really clamp down, put their offense in good field position to score, they had a Peyton Davies turnover. He had the interception, brought it back down to the 5-yard line, set up the first score that really got them going. They went in the halftime 14-12 lead. I was very impressed with West Springfield. And, the offense didn't look bad either with Prokop and Schauder splitting time.
Yeah, let's stick with the defense, though. Levi Barber, you mentioned 168 passing yards, 55 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. But he was molested the entire game. You talk about all the sacks, 6 sacks, I believe, they had in the game. It was just, he could not get in the pocket and feel relaxed at all. So that's a big reason. If you want to stop Edison, you want to stop Levi Barber. I talked to Joey DeSantis, and one thing he mentioned is how hard they worked in the offseason with new head coach JT Biddison. He said their practices were much harder. They are a tougher team than they were last year, and they showed it against Edison. But moving on to this dual quarterback system, moving on to the offense that everybody thought might not be there with head coach Bill Renner leaving last year, but they looked just fine to me with the dual quarterbacks of Eric Schauder and Matt Prokop. Schauder with 70 passing yards, 94 rushing yards, and a TD. Prokop, 86 passing yards, 85 rushing yards, and a TD. What do you think of the two quarterback system?
You know, when you first see it, they have that old adage in the NFL, if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterback. But this team really has two quarterbacks. And Eric Schauder back there, he was so mobile in the pocket. At times, I had to double check and make sure he wasn't wearing number 9. He was wearing that number 3. I mean, there was the one drive where 2 or 3 different times he just escaped, found Nick Pham, found T.J. O'Connell over the middle for a great catch, 22 yards, really took a shot on that play, and just orchestrated a drive. You had Schauder that led him to a drive with a touchdown and a field goal, and Prokop that led them to 2 touchdown drives, one of which did start at the 5-yard line, but had pretty good success with both quarterbacks. They both put up solid numbers, didn't really make that many mistakes, and Coach J.T. Biddison told us in the locker room after the game, hey, as long as it works, we're not going to change anything. So I really do like it. I mean, it's a weird situation. I didn't think it would work, but I want to touch on someone, Nick Pham. How impressed were you with his effort?
Third string running back with Dan Collins and Mike Baber sidelined. He did a fantastic job. A lot of heart there from Nick Pham.
Yeah, he had, 63 rushing yards, 38 receiving yards, including a key third down conversion on the second scoring drive. A lot of heart from him. And the receivers, you still have any option really you want. Offense didn't look too different. They did run hurry up a little bit, and then they huddled some other times. But other than that, I mean, it was just it was a pretty seamless transition between Renner and Biddison. I was very surprised. You
know, a big reason for that, who I'm going to talk about, that offensive line was fantastic. We did have a third string running back in there. He had a fantastic game, but that offensive line, they were giving him nice holes. He was able to move right through that Edison defense that struggled throughout the last 3 quarters.
Yeah, did you end up asking Mike Justice to homecoming? You were talking about him the entire game.
I was impressed with Mike Justice, I'm not going to lie.
And with good reason. He was outstanding.
He had a great game in West Springfield, a great first week for them. But we're going to keep on rolling in this Patriots district and talk about Lake Braddock.
Well, that's right. We talked about West Springfield and how perhaps people underestimated them over the summer. Now let's talk about the flip side of the coin in Lake Braddock, because everybody had high hopes for Lake Braddock coming into the season. As we discussed last week, a lot of that was because of the addition of Bill Renner, and I think people were very curious to see how they would come out in their first game. And there you see Lake Braddock. They're getting the shutout against Langley, 38-0, not taking anything away from Langley like all the teams. They lost a lot to graduation, including David Helmer, Danny Pritchett, and many others. Langley always known for their offensive line. But you see there, Michael Niebrich operating in his first game under the Bill Renner system. You see the numbers that he put up. And then Osmond Manzaray, so huge. He was one of our players to watch. And there you see why he's somebody that's getting a lot of notice from around the region. But guys, how did you think that Niebrich did under the Bill Renner system during his first week out?
Well, Phil, when I talked to a lot of coaches during the preseason, they compared this Lake Braddock QB to Bryn Renner, which obviously that's a nice comparison to have. Bryn over there at University of North Carolina, with Bill Renner at Lake Braddock now, he must feel great to have a quarterback with a similar skill set.
Yeah, and with the renovated offense, I'm going to patent that. The renovated offense, I really like Niebrich. I think he's a perfect quarterback for the system. He's mobile. He's got a good, accurate arm. 294 passing yards, but he was 12 of 16 in the second half. They had some drop passes in the first half. There was a little bit of uncertainty, first real game in the system, and you have a well-coached team in Langley, but Lake Braddock handled it well. Donnie and Marie, Osman Mansaray, 3 touchdowns in the firfirst half for him. And yeah, Niebrich finished 294 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 18 of 32 passing. And again, I think as this team gets farther into the season, they have the offensive line, huge offensive line. I think they're very dangerous. I think we have them number 1 in the poll. I think they're living up to all the hype thus far.
They were number 1 in the poll last week. We have not told them if they're number 1 in the poll this week yet, but a 38-0 victory over Langley. I think it's safe to say they remain in the top spot.
Not going to drop too far.
No, not going to drop too far at all. But let's talk about Mansaray a little bit more. Langley is known for their big, tough, physical linemen on both sides of the ball. Mansaray had huge holes to run through, 3 touchdowns, as we mentioned, in the first half alone. What does this say about this offensive line with Cameron Cole for Lake Braddock?
It says exactly what we thought, Paul. 6'6", 300 on both ends of the line, opening up huge holes for him. Yes, his touchdown runs were short. He didn't have any of the 60-yard runs, but he did have one actually 40-yard reception. Nieberg checked down him beautifully there. But yeah, they have the offensive line to handle it. They have Westfield coming up in a couple weeks. I think that's going to be the ultimate test of if this team can compete. The theme everyone seems to be talking about is, can a Patriot District team win Division VI? Obviously, Lake Braddock is at the front of that list, and it's going to come down to the offensive line play. I think we'll get that test in Week 3 when Braddock takes on Westfield, the game that everyone's going to be looking at. But yeah, until then, I mean, we can't be too sure. But so far, so good.
Most definitely. Another Patriot District team that had a great first week was West Potomac. Monica's going to set us up for that.
West Potomac certainly is a team that perhaps also people underestimate in the Patriot District. That's because some of the other teams get a lot more of the recognition throughout the season. But they started off last year strong, and if last week's game was any indication, it looks like they're going to be doing the same this season. They squared off against Mount Vernon, and you see the score there. The numbers so impressive that they put up, and Colin Mathewson picking up right where Cole Walter left off from last year. It seems like in the West Potomac offense, very, very impressive. But again, like we discussed with the West Springfield game, I think what people were most impressed with here was the West Potomac defense. They only allowed Mount Vernon 6 first downs and 7 rushing yards. So guys, very interested to know what you thought about their defense. And Phil, I'm going to put you on the spot here and see if you have any other renovations or name permutations to throw around.
First 3 games we've seen here in this Patriot District, Phil. Lake Braddock allowed 0 points. West Springfield allowed 12 points to a fantastic Edison offense. West Potomac allows 3 points. The Patriots, it's going to be known for its defense this year.
Yeah, we made a point last week to mention all the Patriot District running backs, but again, to win in the big game, you have to have defense. And as you mentioned, those 3 games that we've talked about, 15 total points allowed. Thomas Stickford had 3 interceptions. West Potomac allows 40 total yards of offense, and in the second half, Mount Vernon ran 18 plays for -3 yards. Can't move the ball, you can't win it. The only reason they had 3 points is because they have one of the best kickers outside of the Liberty District, in Colin Amaro, hit a beautiful 39-yard field goal. Shaquille White, 3 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. This team does it all, and they have a lot of size.
Yeah, again, so as we've seen before, a lot of Patriot District teams rolling. We mentioned they went 7-1 in the first week. Annandale, another Patriot team that got a victory.
All right, so that's some of our information about the Patriot District, but we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, BJ Kubaroulis is going to share with you a little more about this Patriot District, which was so impressive during Week 1.
Welcome back to the Fairfax Sports Report. I'm BJ Kubaroulis. Well, you've heard the guys and Monica talk a lot about the Patriot District, and that is a common theme that I'm finding out on the fields and talking to coaches in the northern region. Everyone is very high on the Patriot District. You heard Phil Murphy of Digital Sports ask the question, can a Patriot District team win the Division VI Northern Region title? Well, not since 1994 has a team from the Patriot District gone on into a state final. I'm a big believer in history. You look at the Northern Region's history, and you look at the state's history, and you pick apart that tradition and that winning history of coaching. Look, right now, the Patriot District has one of the more veteran coaches in the history of the Northern Region when you look at Annandale coach Dick Adams. The rest of the coaching staff within the Northern Region and within the Patriot District, it's hard-pressed to find a coach like Adams. However, your stronger coaching is in the Concord District with coaches like Tom Brabanic of Westfield and Joe Thompson of Oakton. Look, you've got a Bendorf now in each of the Patriot and the Concord District. South County, even though they had a great win over Chantilly this week, Coach Pete Bendorf, one of the more respected coaches in the Northern Region, doesn't even have one of the stronger teams in the Patriot District. Let's run through some of these top teams in the Patriot District. Lee, with the transfers from Paul VI, automatically becomes a contender. Will the defense, though, be able to hold up? West Potomac is a team that has a quarterback in Colin Mathewson that scored 4 touchdowns and threw for almost 300 yards, but he's not even their best player. They've got the offense, the offensive line, and the defense, obviously with 42 points. We've heard a lot about the renovated offense over at Lake Braddock. The Bruins, however, have a great defense. That makes them an instant contender. You take that nucleus of teams and then you circle the wagons around West Springfield, a team that everybody expected would be rebuilding under Coach J.T. Biddison, the perfect guy for a rebuilding project. He took Marshall from nowhere to somewhere. That's why he got the job at West Springfield. However, no one's talking renovation or any of that right now at West Springfield because Biddison has that team right back on track where the Renters left off. W.T. Woodson coming over from the Patriot District with Connor Riley, a quarterback bound for Temple, makes this an even stronger district. So, with that said, all of those teams deserving all of the hype and the preseason accolades and attention that they're getting, especially after week 1, I'm still not ready to buy that a Patriot District team will win the Division 6. You've got so much tradition and, more importantly, coaching in the Concord District. Like I said, I'm a big believer in history. If you take a quick scan of the VHSL record book, you will find that since the last team, Annandale from the Patriot District, went to a state final, there have been 10 teams from the northern region that have gone to a state final. 7 are champions. All 7 have been from the Concord District. There have been 5 different teams of those 7 that have won a state championship. Westfield's got 2. Robinson's been to the championship 3 times and won twice under Coach Mark Bendorf. Coaching, you ask? National Coach of the Year in Bendorf. Oakton has won once of twice. And you've got Centerville and Chantilly, also with state championships. Take all that tradition and you weigh it against what the Patriot District has inconsistently been up and down in the last 10 years. And I'm asking you if you're going to buy that the Division 6 will be won by a Patriot District team. Buy or sell? Tell me what you think on Facebook. Thanks for joining me on this Fairfax Sports Report short. When we come back, Monica Moore and the boys continue to break down the Northern region.
Welcome back to the Fairfax Sports Report. Well, thanks for that, BJ. We are now done with our coverage of the Patriot District, and we're going to move on now to the Concord District, which is traditionally one of the very explosive districts, not only in this region, but also in the state. So let's take a look at how they fared during week 1. So you see there, half and half, 3 wins, 3 losses. Oakton, Herndon, and Robinson getting the wins. Chantilly, Westfield, and Centerville, they are coming up with the losses. Now, Robinson squared off against T.C. Williams, but T.C. Williams was missing their starting quarterback, Joe Hargrove, and so there were questions about how they would fare against a team like the Robinson Rams that people do have some expectations for this year. You see there, Robinson getting the win, 36-23, but guys, how big of a loss was it for T.C. Williams not to have Hargrove, and how important is it if he can play against Mount Vernon next week?
I'd be surprised if Hargrove is able to play. I hear talk that he wants to play next week. And I mentioned Patriot District 7-1 this week. T.C. Williams was the only team that did lose in week 1. But they gave Robinson a fight, a Concord team, Patriot team. They give him a fight.
Yeah, you and I got the halftime score together at the West Springfield Edison game. We were shocked, 23-14. T.C. Williams led at halftime, but this is a story for T.C. Williams last year. They had the lead in 5 games at halftime in which they lost. They go 3-7, and Coach Randolph said that was the biggest thing for this team was finishing. You look at Cortez Taylor, first 3 touches go for 183 all-purpose yards, 2 touchdowns, 90-yard kickoff return for him, and then after that, he had 8 carries for -3 yards. Robinson made a minor adjustment on the sideline. They were able to take him out of the equation, and then in the second half, Jared Velasquez, 3 of his 4 rushing touchdowns came after halftime. He himself carried more times than T.C. Williams ran total plays. So Robinson just controlled the clock, pounded it down T.C.'s throat in all honesty, and just controlled it for the win. So I back on the Hargrove point, John Bray was effective. They ran the offense. T.C., Geller had a couple good passing games last year, but it wasn't a huge piece to replace. And we all thought the running game would be the big thing.
Mm-hmm. But again, Hargrove, he's more than effective. He's a star for this team, and to lose him for 1 week, thinking it's going to be longer, and then think he's coming back next week. What does the team think with that? You're like, oh, we lost our starting quarterback, and it's like, oh, we only lost him for a week.
Well, if you have the 1 quarterback system, it's a big deal. But Coach Randolph told me preseason it was still a competition late into 2-a-days as to who would be the starter. He said he was kind of leaning towards Hargrove. So yeah, bigger body, better, a little bit better of an arm. I don't know if it's that devastating. I think they'll play Mount Vernon very close. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they won that game. Again, they had Robinson 23-14 at halftime. End up Robinson outscores them 22-0 in the second half. And TC, I don't know what it is. That's just what happened with them last year as well, just blowing leads at halftime in the second half.
And despite the loss, they still have to probably feel a little good about how they give Robinson a scare. But that second half, as Phil mentioned, which has happened before, should definitely scare them. But now, one of my favorite games of the week, always rivalry game, Oakton-Madison, and Monica is going to take you through some of these highlights.
That's right. It was the Outback Bowl this year against Oakton and Madison. They square off every single year for this event. Now, Oakton in the past has had a lot of success, so Madison was trying to come out and avenge some losses, and people had a lot of questions for Oakton. We've been discussing a lot about how a lot of the personnel was lost between these teams, and so here you see the Oakton Cougars coming out all fired up, and the game gets underway, and that is Luke Willis, number 4. You're going to see him over and over again on this highlight reel because he was the big answer for Oakton. People were curious about how Oakton was going to replace Trey Watts and Jonathan Meadows. There you see the great defensive play, but the Jimmy Boone, Luke Willis connection proved to be dominant in this event. Luke Willis was all over the place. In fact, when it came time for Oakton to set up to score their second touchdown in the game, Willis had to come out of the game. Joe Thompson wanted to call a timeout just to get him back in, but the official wouldn't let him because Willis was so dominant. Oakton also got a lot of help from Ray Goins, a lot of help from Matt Chandler, and so there's definitely some new offensive players who are going to be making a lot of noise for the Cougars. There you see number 2, Mike McCool for Madison. A lot of people wondering whether he would even play, and you see the statistics there. Luke Willis with that touchdown. He set up the second touchdown as well, which was run in by Jimmy Boone. Boone had to give a lot of credit to his offensive line. After the game, I got to talk with Joe Thompson and our Verizon Fios Player of the Week, Jimmy Boone. I'm standing here with our player of the game, Jimmy Boone, and Oakton head coach Joe Thompson. Now, Jimmy, tonight was your first night directing the offense for Oakton. How does it feel to get the 14-0 win?
It felt great. I had great mentors from last year, so it felt good to just finally be out here.
And, of course, you scored the second touchdown for your team. Can you take us through it? And I'm sure you'll also want to talk a little bit about your offensive line.
Oh, yeah, the offensive line came off the ball great. Unfortunately, we had a great play call, so that's all I can really say.
Now on the sidelines, I've seen different hairstyles. You have the mohawk. I've seen what look like cougar stripes. Talk to me a little bit about the hairstyles.
Well, it's always a tradition before the Outback Bowl to go to someone's house and everyone gets haircuts, different designs.
Now, Coach, of course, you went into halftime with the 14-0 lead. That's a good position to be in. What did your team do well in the second half?
Well, defensively, we were able to keep getting stops. I think offensively, we beat ourselves in the second half. We just I don't know if it was complacent or we just wore out, but we made some mistakes we shouldn't have been making. Certainly not the mistakes we made in the first half. We didn't keep our intensity up, and it cost us. We weren't able to really finish drives. It felt like we moved the ball well. We just didn't finish any drives. It kept getting knocked back in those long yard situations. Madison's too well coached to give that up.
Now, of course, next week you have a hungry West Springfield team. What are the big focuses that you guys will have this coming week?
Well, I mean, obviously we're going to try and improve ourselves first and foremost. We'll take a look at our film and see what we've done wrong and try to get better there, and then we'll take a look at what West Springfield's doing and try to put a game plan together.
Well, Coach Jimmy, congratulations. So a victorious Oakton Cougar team. The Cougars had a lot to be happy with. They had the shutout, but Paul, they also had a lot of penalties in the second half. What were your impressions of Oakton's play during the second half?
Well, again, yeah, they had those penalties that cost them on a couple of drives, a lot of penalties on that offensive line, but that's mental. They're going to do a couple wind sprints this week, and that's just stuff that can be fixed. You can't really fix the physical stuff. You can fix the mental stuff, so no worries there. The big thing that I was really impressed about with Oakton this week is all of the preseason. This team went 13-1 last year. You said, well, who's going to replace Chris Coyer? Who's going to replace Trey Watts? Well, I think we got an answer this week in Luke Willis and Jimmy Boone. Now, they're still a little raw. I mean, the first time starting. They started together on JV last year, first time starting a varsity game. Excuse me. Both said that they had a little bit of butterflies, a little nerves, but they played fantastically. Luke Willis with 74 rushing yards, 46-yard reception TD. Jimmy Boone with 148 passing yards, 73 receiving yards, and 2 TDs, 73 rushing yards and 2 TDs. did fantastic. Head coach Joe Thompson was pleased with the way his 2 young stars were able to play. Phil, what does this win mean for Oakton? Because again, this is their 2nd straight Outback Bowl win. They lost in 2007, but their 2nd straight Outback Bowl win. You see Ray Goins there, had a great game there at wide receiver, one of the key guys coming back for the Cougars. But what does this win mean?
Well, it means they're towards the top of the Concord District again. They return all 5 starters in the offensive line. Yes, Coyer, Watts, gone. But if you can find replacements for those, and I think the way this team's structured is a lot like West Potomac in that whole offensive line back, quarterback, a very successful quarterback gone, but a kid that started on JV coming back up. You got athletes to replace that wide receiver, in the backfield, but they have the pieces to plug in. I think Oakton's going to be very good. I really like this Oakton-West Springfield game in Week 2, the rematch of last year's Division VI semifinal. Paul, what are your thoughts on that game?
Well, again, it's 2 teams that we didn't know what to think about heading into Week 1, and now we know they're both 2 pretty good teams. So it makes for an exciting game. Again, another Patriot-Concord battle to see which district is at the top right now, so it should be a fantastic game. One thing I do want to mention is this was a shutout for Oakton. As we know, 14-0 they won. They beat Madison 14-0. This was their first shutout over Madison since 2004. Oh yeah, we mentioned they were 13-1 last year. They didn't have a shutout last year. Their last shutout was in 2006, a 54-0 win over Fairfax. That shows how good their defense was playing against Madison. Granted, Madison had some players hurt, but they did have quarterback Eric Rowland, who had 104 passing yards, 43 rushing yards. There was obviously Mike McCool as well coming back. Didn't know if he was going to be injured or not. He had a great game there for Madison, but it was the Oakton defense. They did a great job, kept Madison off their toes. They earned the 14-0 victory.
And Paul, you mentioned, or BJ mentioned before, the coaching in the Concord districts. A stat you'd mentioned to me before was that Oakton's won the region every 3rd year, 2003, 2005, 2008. What a testament that is to being able to replace talent, have the program cycle through. So yes, starters lost, but this is a deep program with a lot of kids, really able to replace pieces and do well.
All right, well, that is it for the Concord District. Now we're going to jump into the Liberty District, a district that Madison plays in, and Monica is going to take you through the district standings after Week 1.
Well, that's right. The Liberty District, certainly also a very interesting one. People always seem to have their eyes on Stonebridge. It's hard not to after the success that Stonebridge has had year after year. And, of course, Stonebridge had the big matchup this week, the Battle of the Bulldog against Westfield. But let's see how the rest of the Liberty District fared this week. So you see Stonebridge there coming out with a win. South Lakes and McLean, the other teams coming up with a loss during this week. But the game everybody was talking about was the Battle of the Bulldog. The first time that these 2 teams have met in their school's history. Now, of course, these are 2 of our newer schools in the region, so that's not altogether a shocking statistic. But you see there Stonebridge squeaking out the win, 21-18. You see Marcus Harris coming up huge, as well as Spencer Rosatano also coming up huge. Danny Finyak for Westfield, and then Gary Turner, a player that everyone's been talking about. Now, between these 2 teams, they lost 40 all-district players. And so people were wondering, who are going to be the players that are going to step up this year, the names that we're going to talk about week after week, like Jordan Anderson, like Patrick Thompson. Guys, I've talked about Gary Turner. People think he could be one of the best athletes in the region. Which players from these 2 teams were you most impressed with during their matchup?
Just looking at the stat line here, Monica, it's my boy Spencer. 2 touchdowns, had that blocked field goal that sealed the win for the Bulldogs. This was his coming out party, I think.
It was. You mentioned Spencer Rosatano. He had a rushing touchdown. He was on the end of a wide receiver pass, 66-yard touchdown that put Stonebridge up for good, and then he blocked the game-tying extra point. That's a hat trick in football. I mean, you can't really ask for much more than that. Also, a linebacker that stuck out for me for Westfield, I think he's going to be key in leading this defense, which only returned 1 starter, is Harry Van Trees, number 42. He was all over the field, disrupting a lot of plays. We're going to be talking a little bit about the West Potomac-Westfield matchup. I think a player like this is someone that's going to need to come up big in their big games. He did. Westfield came up a little bit short, but I think you hit the nail right on the head with Rosatano. Outstanding game, did it all. Ran, received, and then did it on special teams.
Now, Westfield quarterback Danny Finyak, 112 passing yards, had a TD and had an interception, but I think he found himself a nice little target in Gary Turner, 120 receiving yards and a TD.
Yeah, and I think a good compliment to Turner, yes, 120 yards, had the touchdown. Aaron Scoville, another guy that's first-year starter, six receptions, 39 yards for him. When you got him going underneath, you have to respect that, and he's able to pick up conversions and get first down. So that's what opened up things for Turner. But yeah, like Monica said, this kid has the ability to be an all-district type receiver. Great athlete, great game.
Hopefully you had a chance to obviously check this game out. What I'm interested in knowing is, what does this mean for Westfield? They lose. I can't remember a time they lost an opening week game. We think both the Bulldog teams might be a little down, but what does it say about Westfield losing in a very close game to Stonebridge, both great programs?
Yeah, that's the 2007 state champs. It says, yeah, they're still a quality team, but it says they have to win one of the next two games. You look at it on this schedule, no cup tapes coming up. They have West Potomac week 2, Lake Braddock week 3, and then you get into the Concord District schedule week 6. I mean, imagine, Paul, what if Westfield loses one of the next two games? They're 1-2 going into with the Concord District schedule right around the corner.
What if they lose both of those games? They're 0-3 with very little confidence heading into their very important districts.
Too far ahead of ourselves, but it is possible.
We are talking about West Potomac and Lake Braddock, and I believe we are picking that West Potomac game, and we'll see what we think is going to happen, but that definitely could happen. And then looking at the next game on the list, Falls Church and South Lakes. South Lakes had a big win, Monica.
Absolutely. South Lakes, they're coming up huge in their matchup. Also, McLean winning in the Liberty District this week. And so those were the three teams in the Liberty District. You see the McLean, Washington, and Lee game. So guys, McLean putting up some huge numbers. Riley Barrow was on our players to watch list. He was an impressive player last year. How's he matured over the summer? And he really came out and led his McLean team to this great victory.
Well, Riley Barrow, 2 years ago, his sophomore year, Coach Rivera compared him to a German Shepherd and how he is on the field. Just attack, attack, attack. He's got great agility, great athleticism, and it was on display against a Washington Lee team that did lose a lot of pieces, but 290 yards, you can't discount that. He did it on special teams, too. The kid last year had 8 kickoff returns, took 3 back to the house. He was a second-team all-district return man behind only Max Weisnager, who was an all-region caliber player. And Barrow and company got Coach Jim Patrick an overdue first career win. I mean, absolutely across all fields. You have to be proud of this team. Will Hecht and Jonathan Fremerman found him twice. Played pretty solid defense. I think they could eke out a couple Liberty District wins this year.
That'll be important in the always tough Liberty District with teams like Madison and Stonebridge. Well, we're going to take a break here real quick from football and jump into volleyball. Monica Moore and her volleyball report.
That's right. Well, as everyone who watches the program knows, volleyball is one of my favorite sports. Love to talk about it. And of course, in the region this year, people having such expectations for a lot of the teams. So first of all, let's take a look at my rankings to see where the teams are this week. Now, of course, Chantilly at the top. No surprise there. Chantilly having a great season so far, undefeated. A lot of people think they could be undefeated for a while. Those 2 wins against Flint Hill and West Springfield. Now, actually, these look like the rankings from last week, unfortunately, because South County should be in the number 2 position there. They defeated Westfield, so Westfield should be in the 5th place position. So just make that mental alteration in your minds, because South County has come out of the box so impressive, beating Westfield 3-0, also beating several teams in a tournament that defeated Westfield. Now, everybody knows what a great team Westfield is. Certainly, they lost Sammy Spees to graduation, lots of other players, but South County, everyone has their eyes on them. They're starting off strong, and I certainly expect for them to continue. Now, in the 3rd place position is Stonebridge, and a lot of people are very excited about them. Of course, they were the Liberty District champions, and with Langley faltering a little bit early in the season, they're the favorite right now to win the Liberty District. Herndon in the 4th place position. Now, Stonebridge and Herndon squared off last night. Stonebridge came up with the win, but this Herndon team is a team that I'm very impressed with. I think that they could make some noise in the Concord District, so certainly keep your eyes on them, because they might be a little under the radar right now. But I think once we get into district play, people will be talking a lot about the Herndon Hornets. And then finally, still in my rankings is Westfield. We talked last week about the fact that they have one of the hardest schedules in the region, if not maybe the state. They're playing a lot of tough competition. This is a great move on Jim Boer's part. He's really trying to test them, so they're going to be ready around district and region tournament time. And so while they faltered a little bit early on, I think that that's just going to help them become much stronger as the season progresses. Now I want to highlight two teams this week, show you how they've been doing. So first of all, let's turn our spotlight to Stonebridge, which is a team that I've been very, very excited about. You see that they participated in the Sharonda tournament there. They had a lot of success. They won 2 games. They lost to Loudoun County, but you see the statistics there, and those are 3-game statistics, so that's why the numbers may seem a little high for volleyball, but you see the 3 players that people are expecting a lot out of. The setter, Amanda Miller, who's coming in to replace Lily Vera, who was the Stonebridge setter that everybody talked about so much because she was so phenomenal. Amanda Miller, of course, stepped in for her last year when Lily Vera was injured. She's definitely very impressive so far this season. So I think a lot of people should expect a lot out of the Stonebridge club because I think they're going to do exceptionally well. And then let's turn to a team in the Patriot District now. Let's take a look at Woodson, another team. You see there that they defeated Madison, and you see the statistics. Tiffany Vu is a player that a lot of people in the region have been talking about. She's a libero, very, very impressive young volleyball player, and so she will be a player that we'll talk about a lot this season, as well as Jackie Palashak, the coach's daughter. Those 2 players are fearless. They throw their bodies around. They're willing to do anything in order to help their team. So they're normally a little banged up, but those 2 players have a lot of heart, getting a lot of support from some of their teammates this year. So Woodson, another team that I'm keeping my eyes on because I'm expecting some big things out of the Woodson Cavaliers. All right, now going back to the rankings, you see there, you see South County there in the number 2 position. Didn't want to cheat them out of that because they have been so impressive so far. Simone Antwi, will have more about her next week. Of course, she's that exceptionally tall young woman who's getting a lot of college attention, Duke, Stanford, just to name a few. So that's where the rankings stand this week. You'll have to tune in next week to see where the rankings stand then. All right, well, let's move back over to football now. We've talked about Concord, we've talked about Patriot, we've talked about Liberty, so let's now talk about the National District and show you what happened in the National District this week. So you see Hayfield, the new addition, getting a big win, as well as Yorktown, who played an out-of-region team, Wilson, from DC. So guys, those were the 2 wins in the National District. The other teams coming up with losses, including the Edison, and we didn't talk a ton about Edison when we were talking about the West Springfield matchup. So what do you think about those 2 big wins for Hayfield and Yorktown, and what can Edison take away from that loss to West Springfield?
Yeah, Monica, oh boy, Edison losing there in that first game. One of the few bright spots last year for the National District. And what I believe it says is they need to get tougher. They have the athletes. They have Levi Barber. But it just looked like they were overpowered in that second half by West Springfield. So I think that's something that they need to do is just get tougher. But one team that we talked about that moved into the Patriot District, one of the 2 teams that won this week in the National District, Hayfield, another team, Yorktown. Now Yorktown, we don't know much about what their, how big that win was, playing a team from DC and Woodrow Wilson, 36-14. Eric Cardillo with 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, but what it does say is that the spread's working so far. They had their 4th-string quarterback, Jordan Smith, back there, and he went 19 of 30 passing for 177 yards and 2 scores. Eric Cardillo had 2 touchdown runs. Mike Veith, 9 receptions, 100 yards, one of the best receiving performances this week, I think second only to DeAndre Essex of West Potomac. And what you said about Hayfield, the team moving into the National District, people thought could make some noise. Boy, did they look great with Anton McCollum, 3rd-year starter. Right off the bat, 34-yard touchdown run for him. This team had 4 touchdowns of 35 yards or longer, including that Rayshon Riggins 68-yard punt return, which was one of the highlights of the week. Thought he was tackled in a crowd and just ran out, got it to the edge, and took off. He also finished with 3 carries for 103 yards and a rushing touchdown. And Stephen Lynch, 7 carries, 109 yards and a rushing touchdown. So a lot of firepower from Hayfield, a lot of talent back. And Coach Billy Pugh, who last year said it's going to be a down year for us, he was right. This year he said he knows we're about 17 or 18 pieces were of his starting 22 going into the season, and it showed against Marshall at home in their first game.
Talking to all the coaches around the National District in the preseason, they said they really like what this Hayfield team that's coming up entering the National District. I believe they went 1-9 last year in the Patriot District, and I started thinking, well, this Hayfield team might be able to challenge for a National District title. And then I was like, well, you got the Edisons, but Week 1 showed that Hayfield has a great chance, had a fantastic game. You can see there right now they're leading 1-0 overall after Week 1. Yorktown with the other win, everybody else falling, but right now, I mean, I really like what Hayfield has. It's working for them too, Phil.
Yeah, and you're talking possibly win the district. Obviously, the team they have to beat is Edison.
Yeah.
And what we kind of questioned was, you're right, toughness. They were just overpowered in the second half. They have the athletes. They have 8 starters back on offense, but West Springfield's defense just ripped them up in the second half. They really couldn't do anything. Levi Barber was under complete duress. He completed a few passes, but a lot of pressure on him from West Springfield. I'd like to see that Edison-Hayfield matchup. I think Hayfield matchup against Lee this week is going to be very interesting. Everyone talking about the Lee offense. Lee defensive line has 4 junior starters on it. No returning starters, and they're still plugging in some holes there. So defending a triple option, you got to stay at home. You have to be disciplined. If Hayfield runs it like they did this week, I think Hayfield could give Lee a much closer game than we all expect.
And don't get us wrong here. We're not saying we think Edison's going to go below 500. We're not saying we even think they're not going to make the playoffs. We're just saying that after week 1, things look tough for the Eagles. After week 1, things look good for the Hawks. Now let's check out the entire region week 1 because we have our ranking. Monica Moore is going to take us through them.
That's right. It is time to unveil our FSN top 10 ranking. We alluded to this a little earlier. Paul said Lake Braddock doesn't know if they're going to secure the number 1 spot yet again, but there they are. Lake Braddock in the number 1 position. No surprise there after the performance this week against Langley, and then no surprise that Stonebridge moved up as well after their very impressive win over Westfield. Now South County there in the number 3 position. No shock as well with the big win over Chantilly, but Westfield still getting a lot of respect from us here at the Fairfax Sports Report. West Springfield, Herndon, West Potomac, Robinson, Oakton, and Annandale rounding out the list. But guys, in looking at this list, who do you think's on the bubble? We vote on this list, but not every team that gets votes gets on the list. So who should perhaps be in it next week? Who should be under consideration that you're not seeing up there?
One thing I'm seeing that I voted for Annandale to be on the list. I'm really liking almost all these teams in the Patriot District. But Phil, what about Lee?
Lee's got to be right on the edge of it. Again, we kind of expected them to win pretty comfortably over a Wakefield team that was 3-7 last year and lost its best player in Romeo Goffney. But Idris Augustus looked awesome. 4 touchdowns for him in that game. So yes, if Lee comes out and looks good against Hayfield and their defense stops Hayfield, you will see Lee in the poll in the next week. I think they're one of the first teams knocking on the door. Something that surprised me a little bit as we go back to the rankings, I really like Herndon, man. I saw them against, I know they're playing a Jefferson team that historically hasn't been that great. They beat them 61-6, but that defense for the Hornets was absolutely punishing. And I just think they could really make some noise. I probably would have put them a little bit ahead of West Springfield, but Paul, what do you think?
West Potomac, that's one that I am embarrassed was not on the preseason rankings. They showed how good a team they are. They actually, you see that number 7, they're going to be playing Westfield this week, and we'll see what people think about that game coming up here real soon. Monica Moore is going to take us through these last week's pick'ems, where I think some fantastic co-host over here got a pretty good week.
Well, that's right, Paul. Of course, it's going to be you that brings up the voting from last week because Paul was our winner. He got 3 out of 4 right. So just to remind you how it all went down last week, you see there, Paul from getting the Stonebridge pick while the rest of us picked Westfield. Now, the South County Chantilly game, 3 out of 4 for us there. We talked about how we all picked Edison across the board, West Springfield coming out the winner. And then, of course, we've put a lot of confidence in this Lake Braddock club. So the way it stands now, Paul 3, Monica and Phil 2, BJ with 1. But let's see the games of the week for this week and how your reporters here at the Fairfax Sports Report picked them. All right, so guys, those are the games of the week. We see your picks. So one thing I want to hear about from everybody is the Madison-Yorktown game. We have a little dissension there, so Phil, I'm going to throw it to you to defend your pick.
Well, I loved how Yorktown looked with the spread. Again, we're playing a team from Woodrow Wilson in D.C. that we don't know a ton about, but I just think they looked great. And I don't know how long Sam Nottingham's out. Whether or not he's back, Jordan Smith was great for them. Physical team defensively, didn't make too many mistakes. I didn't know I'd be alone on that. The one I thought I'd be alone on actually is the West Potomac Westfield. I thought I was really going out on a limb there, but it seems like everyone's hopped on the West Potomac bandwagon, and why not? Colin Mathewson only lost 2 games total in 3 years on freshman and JV. Comes out first varsity game. In the first half of that game, 13-19 passing, 234 yards, and 4 touchdowns. They have 3 capable receivers in Essex, Lee, and Rosencrantz. all around a great team.
And one thing, I am alone here on the Westfield. You thought you were going on a limb. It looks like I'm going on a limb here. Westfield, you know, I picked against them last week. I was the only one to pick against them. That pick was right for me. This week, I'm the only one to pick for them. I'm showing the Bulldogs a little bit more love now. We know how good this West Potomac team is. I still don't know how good this Westfield team is. I know they're going to get better from week 1 to week 2, from week 2 to week 3, from week 3 to week 7. They are going to be a better team each week. So I like my Westfield pick. Another one with West Springfield. That West Springfield Oakton. Now both teams had good wins in week 1. What do you think is going to happen there? Everybody except for BJ goes with West Springfield.
Yeah, maybe we're just biased because we saw West Springfield in person, but they looked very good. And again, I don't want everyone to think I think Westfield's having a down year. I thought this would be an upset pick, picking West Potomac. I just figured they'd be more athletic and a little bigger than Westfield would have thought. But Westfield, they were pretty disciplined last week against Mickey Thompson's wing tee over at Stonebridge. So I'm surprised there. But back to the West Springfield Edison game, I think this team has a chip on its shoulder. They proved that last week. The defensive line was great. They really got after Levi Barber. And this Edison team gave up the 2 big plays early, but they really, pinned their ears back and came after him after that. I think they want to avenge last year's loss that ended a lot of the seasons of this senior class that was very hopeful. So guys like T.J. O'Connell, Joey DeSantis, juniors that are experienced, have been in this system, they know what it's all about. I think they're going to step up big in this game, and that's why I picked them.
In the Oakton game, they only beat Madison 14-0, a Madison team that was hurt by injuries. Madison's still a good team, but a 2-score win over Madison, that shows that, and West Springfield's victory was just a lot more convincing. These are 2 teams that we thought might be down that proved they are not down. They're 2 elite teams in this region. All 3 of us, except for BJ, think West Springfield is going to grab it. But Monica, only Patriot District game of the week, the only district game of the week is Lake Braddock and Woodson. We all think Lake Braddock. You do too.
Absolutely, and that is going to be our Verizon Fios Game of the Week. So we are going to be there this week, so we'll have all the highlights and footage of that game. But a lot of people have a lot of confidence in this Lake Braddock team. I'm very excited to see them play on Friday, and so I think that's going to be a great matchup, as will all of the matchups on our Game of the Week, and completely agree with you guys about West Springfield. I'm very excited about that game, too. Having seen Oakton last week, I was impressed with them. Luke Willis was a very impressive player. I'm very interested to see how the Oakton defense is going to match up with the West Springfield offense. Well, before we go, let's talk a little bit about cross country and take you through some of the races that have happened so far so that you can see what's been going on in the region. There you see the PR Relay Kickoff. That was the first annual of that event. So looking forward to many more of that great event, which was a relay. So they combined the times of the competitors. Lake Braddock was the team that won, and Liana Epstein. Everyone has such high expectations from her, of course, because of her performance last year. She led that Lake Braddock team. They came out with the team win, followed by West Potomac in second, Thomas Jefferson in third, Robinson, and then Edison. And looking down the list, you see some names that we had on our cross-country runners to watch yet list. Julianne Bigler, Stephanie Marzin on there, Catherine Sheridan, another runner that people are very excited about. And so that's what's going on with that event for the girls. Now let's take a look at what happened with the boys event. Now you see Western Branch there coming up huge. Their top runner there, Blake Thoreau. He's a very impressive runner, another one that people have been talking about throughout the region. They won the event, but coming in second was West Potomac, followed by Centerville, Jefferson, and Lake Braddock. So the Northern Region team's performing very well. And then finally, we want to show you what the Oakton team has been up to. So you see they participated in the Chancellor Invitational. Now, Oakton is a cross-country team that people always have their eyes on. And Andrew McCullen, one of the best in the region, people have very high expectations for him. People have very high expectations for Patrick Fulgham. So you see what happened there at that event. It's early in the season, people wondering who are going to be the other Oakton runners to step up. So you see how it broke down for some of the other runners there for the Cougars. We'll keep you up to date on that. Next week, we'll have coverage of the Monroe Parker Invitational. It's always one of the big events that cross-country fans are paying attention to because you get to see how the young runners are doing. And so we'll have pictures. Paul Fromont will be there, and so he'll have coverage for us of that. So if you're a cross-country fan, we'll have lots more on that next week. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Fairfax Sports Report. Before we go, we once again want to thank the folks that helped make this program possible. First of all, our good friends at CCI Screen Printing for all of your screen printing needs at 703-978-0257. Also, special thanks to Craig Sturwetzel for those fantastic photos you can purchase at www.fatboyphotos.com. You can get copies of this program and all of our games at www.pressboxvideo.com. And don't forget to check out our website with our special Video Vault feature. You can become a fan of the Fairfax Sports Network on Facebook and send us any comments, suggestions, story ideas, or anything you want to tell us at our email address. Well, again, thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you again next week.